Get ready to enter a brave new world with your host, Vasant Dhar.
Brave New World is sponsored by the Fubon Center for Technology, Business, and Innovation at the NYU Stern School of Business. For more color on the podcast and additional commentary, please subscribe to my newsletter at vasantdhar.substack.com. Hello, and welcome to Brave New World. My guest today is Prashanth Chandrasekar, CEO of Stack Overflow. It's a platform I've used and admired for a long time for the simplicity of its objective function, namely, to curate and leverage human expertise to help its users, that is, programmers, to do their work as efficiently as possible. Prashanth, welcome to Brave New World. Delighted to have you on the show.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me, Vasant.
So, Prashanth, before we get into sort of the agenda for the day, just tell us a little bit about yourself and, your growing up experience and what finally led you to Stack Overflow and, being the CEO of the company.
Sure. Happy to do it. I grew up in Bangalore, India until I was about 17 years old. Grew up with a dad who spent a lot of time internationally. He used to work for the United Nations, but had a very multidisciplinary sort of background. My mom was a medical doctor. She still is in a very specific specialty. Very hard worker, service-oriented. And I realized very early on that I really wanted to study abroad based on my dad's perspectives that he brought back on his trips. And so I was very fortunate to get a scholarship, full scholarship to come to the US. And I came to the University of Maine. And it was quite a journey to go from Bangalore, India, 7 million people, to a town of, 10,000 people or so. But it was amazing, very grateful to them. I serve on the board of visitors today and, effectively for other folks who want to do the same. But just an amazing journey from that point onwards, where I started out in computer engineering. I was a software developer in some early companies and during my time, even in school at co-ops, et cetera. And I realized that a lot of what my interests were centered around were how are these great technology companies built? How do they scale? How do they really create the impact around the world that they did? And that curiosity took me to, graduate school at Cornell and business school. And then ultimately, really got into the workforce where, it was all about really pulling together this multidisciplinary type of background where went into consulting, operational consulting, banking, focused on technology companies and M&A, et cetera. And then operating roles at companies, fast-growing companies like Rackspace in my former chapter. And then I was very fortunate to get approached about this role, the iconic company with a platform that has served millions of people around the world. And the idea was, how can we transform it into something that's a lot more of an enterprise-oriented platform? And that's what we've been up to over the past several years. But yeah, it's been quite the journey, but wouldn't trade it for anything. It's just, it's been amazing.
Well, Bangalore, of course, is a big, tech center in India. My friend Nandan, iconic figure in the Indian software industry, operates out of there. And I actually co-founded a software company in the mid-90s in Bangalore. My landlord was the cricketer EAS Prasanna.
Famous guy. Yeah.
Famous. And, he used to be a hero of mine growing up. And I couldn't believe that, here he was, in the flesh. So,
yeah, cricket's had a big impact on my life. I grew up, playing it very seriously until I was in high school, in fact. Yeah.
Yeah, as did I actually in boarding school. And I came to the US and, IIT and then the US. And of course, no cricket here, although that's changing some, especially around New York City.
That is true.
So, Prashanth, let's talk about Stack Overflow, right? This is a company that, I used to hold up as an example of, one with the right objective function, especially in the early days of social media companies whose sole motivation was to sort of maximize engagement and keep you hooked on the site as long as possible. Right. Where Stack Overflow had a different kind of objective function, which was to help people, to help humans, help developers with their problems. And I used it a lot. I've programmed, various languages. And I remember when I was early days of Python, I'd go there and find it incredibly useful. And then came ChatGPT, right? So November 2022, when was your sort of innovator's dilemma moment once ChatGPT came out?
Yeah, no, excellent question. My professor, by the way, in business school at HBS was Clayton Christensen. So I learned Innovators Deliver straight from the man himself, and faced it a couple times. First in my former company, Rackspace, now here. But the moment, to answer your question, was November 2022. Exactly the moment when ChatGPT came out. It was, definitely the, call it the SHIT moment. It was really a sensation around, we played this role for the past 15 years as being sort of the place where destination where developers went to get unstuck when they were having issues, writing code with, the power of the community. And here we are with the fairly large abstraction of LLMs, which are now able to effectively, they had scraped effectively the internet, effectively including our own site or a set of sites, and now had this, beautiful interface that people could just sort of query. And, you went past all the kind of the machinations of interacting with humans. And now you've got a straight answer from, a centralized AI. And that was a very big moment for us because, we had to immediately react on, this is, as I said, a code red moment, if you will. And so for us to say, okay, we have to have a response to this.
So did you see it right away? Like, when this thing came out, was it sort of obvious to you that your world had changed and that you had to pivot, or did it take some time to sort of absorb the gravity of the situation?
No, we very quickly saw an impact in the number of questions, probably in the first 3 months. So I think November through, by the time we came into the new year, we pretty much knew that, okay, this is going to have a meaningful impact because people were all going there. Effectively, the substitution, right? You're able to ask the question, but you're asking it in a much different sort of environment versus a human environment. And so does, which one are you going to choose? And so we really had to take this very seriously. And we probably activated pretty early, pretty hard, which was the right thing to do, even before the data truly, showed big red marks, etc. And I'm glad we did because we set a marker for, say, around 6 months out, which was a very specific conference that I'd been invited to come speak at, which was the VR Developers Conference in Berlin, Germany. And so we carved out, by the way, based on the recommendation of Clayton Christensen on you create an autonomous team, which is very different incentives, and you effectively put them on this problem, which is, very different and almost, anti to your own core business, which is the Q&A platform. And you effectively get them to innovate very rapidly on a completely different plane versus, incremental innovation. So, or sustaining innovation, as he would say. So we did that. 10% of the company was carved out, and we went and really had them empowered to say, go build all the things we need to go build. And I was personally involved in that process. I ran product at that time to get closer to the problem. We had to effectively reinvent the public platform as well as our enterprise business. So just to maybe explain to the audience, Stack Overflow is made up of this public platform that everybody knows about. But we also I'd been hired in 2019 to start an enterprise business called Stack Internal, now called Stack Internal, then called Stack Overflow for Teams. And that was a private version, a knowledge repository inside companies that we were selling. So we had both these vectors that we had to sort of address this issue with. And we very quickly incorporated a lot of AI functionality into both sides of the equation.
So tell us a little about the second one, because everyone knows the public website. So what's this other part of your business that you were tasked with developing? What was the thinking and what was the value proposition there?
Yeah, great question. So the enterprise business of Stack Overflow, it's all about, because of this problem of having shared knowledge that everybody benefits from, where you're not really asking the same questions over and over again, and you have this kind of shared institutional memory, is a really big need inside companies. Companies have employees, they come in and out, they join companies, they leave companies, they get fired, all sorts of things happen, they change teams. But the knowledge that is being sort of produced or created on a daily basis through interactions and questions and answers are all effectively going to the wind. Effectively, they're stuck in Slack channels, they're stuck in outdated documents. So all that information needs to be centralized in a way that the organization collectively is able to benefit from that. And so our product, Stack Internal, creates what we like to say a knowledge intelligence layer and memory, so that it's an institutional platform where all the knowledge that's relevant and critical, like the objective knowledge you're talking about, like what we've been doing on the public platform, now exists on this platform that can be used by humans and now AI agents. because they're now rooted in the relevant context of the organization that can be trusted ultimately. So that's what that product's about. And we've been rapidly evolving that. And we have some of the world's largest companies running on that platform very successfully and very, very happily as they share institutional knowledge and create it as a memory layer within their company. So that's what that product is, Vasant. So just to finish the earlier point, so our reaction was, hey, let's go incorporate AI very quickly into both sides of this, the public platform as well as the private Stack internal product and enterprise product, as well as we went and engaged with all the big AI companies and hyperscalers to partner with them because they had all effectively scraped our data to train their AI models. So we said, hey, let's make this a more formal relationship. Congratulations. This is a pretty big development of, abstracting to the next layer. Easily the biggest in my, experience in the tech industry. And so we said, let's work with you. And so we created these very symbiotic relationships where they paid us for data from our public platform every year, and they continue to pay us for that. And they're able to get the data from our website, our public website, and they're able to train their models, and we continue to generate data through the user interactions on our platform. So that is one element of what we did. And then more recently, we have been really noticing very large scale increases of API usage on our private enterprise product. And we realized that, when we talked to customers, that they were plugging it into things like AI agents and search and all these sort of things. So we really have been transforming the enterprise business to be, as I mentioned, the knowledge intelligence layer by incorporating all sorts of things, MCP server, to really create trust scoring, to be able to ingest other parts of the company's knowledge into this platform, chunking it up to ultimately create these kind of really rich metadata-oriented elements that can be then reused by all these AI agents. It's also capturing agentic interactions inside companies. So all these things are happening on our enterprise platform, and that's really where our focus has been most recently. And then one last point I'd mentioned, Vasant, is as recently as last week, we also heard from users that, they wanted to effectively have a Stack Overflow, but Stack Overflow, as you pointed out, is all about humans, but they wanted it for their agents on the public platform. So last week, we launched, after a very, very excellent sprint by our team, a new product on the public platform called Stack Overflow for Agents. So what is that? It's all about agents sharing with each other the same way that humans on our platform have shared information for over 15 years. Now we have the ability for any of our users, as they're using Cloud Code or using Codex, when those agents are running into issues, for them to post it on this common place, which is this, again, open place, which is called Stack Overflow for Agents. It's agents.stackoverflow.com. And then those agents are exchanging information for the public good again. So we're staying consistent with our early principles, only for now, for this generation.
Wow, what a trip. Agent helping agents, a topic we shall return to shortly. So Prashanth, what's the end game here? Where I'm coming from is sort of my first impression was, this is an existential threat for platforms that monetize human data, that monetize human expertise, right? You've got maybe 100, 200 like really power users like John Skeet, maybe,
right, many more than that, but the point well made, yes. Mm-hmm.
Right, that there's this power law, right? That you've got like a few people who are amazing, who've like really helped craft, your knowledge base, right? Because these guys have answered like, gazillions of questions, and people think they're amazing. First, a tangential question, but then my main question, which is this a disappearing business in the long term, right? But before I ask that question, I'll give you some time to think about it. Why do people contribute like this? What motivates people like John and other power users like that? Is it altruism? Is it ego? Is it a desire to help people? Like all of the above? What is it that motivates these people to spend so much of their time and effort contributing towards helping other people?
Yeah, excellent question. I'll answer the second question first and come back to your first one. I think the underlying motivation, when I joined the company in 2019, I asked the same question ultimately when I was doing my diligence before I joined. And it was very clear that the core reason why people started on this platform together, the founders brought together these core users early on, was truly an altruistic intention, which is to give others a gift. Because any of us, including you and I, who have written code know the frustration of, getting stuck at 2 a.m. and being, unable to sort of, be able to move forward in whatever you're building. I remember that so clearly. And my only way to actually get out of that was to ask somebody like a professor, or ask a fellow student, or somebody who was in the lab, something like that. But when Stack Overflow was launched in 2008, it completely changed the game, because now you have access to the world's experts. You're dealing with 100 million people who have had potentially one of them or many have one or more of them have actually encountered the same issues. So of course it creates this amazing effect. So the ability to help people, especially when your answer can have a kind of compound effect. One of the most popular statistics we used to share was, hey, your answer helped 1 million people since you actually answered that 6 years ago, and people get a lot of personal satisfaction out of that. Now, with that, that's the intrinsic motivation. But then comes the extrinsic motivations that you also mentioned, which are things like reputation, ego. Perhaps you can equate it to ego, reputation points. But that could be partly ego. It could be partly more recognition for the work that they're doing, and ultimately that gives them the ability to showcase that they're in fact talented people. They actually were able to help people with very difficult problems. And so when, let's say, they're thinking about getting their next job, very commonly, our users point to their Stack Overflow profile and say, look at all the work I've done over the past 10 years. I've helped all these users in all these complex issues. And that gives you a very, very objective, to use your word again, view of the developer ecosystem. It's not because you tried to, have controversial social media responses. It was literally you helped somebody and somebody voted that answer up as the best answer to that question. And that's helped 1 billion people. Like, that counts. Like, you're one of the few who was able to do that. So I would say those are the two. One's an intrinsic motivation to be altruistic, to help people, and the other one's an extrinsic one. So that's the answer to your second question. The first one around whether it's a disappearing business model as it relates to humans, I actually think it's the opposite. I think it may not be as it relates to the human community. I don't think it will be what it was before, where you have 100 million people exchanging objective answers to questions, because now you have access to effectively a calculator. If you use an analogy, now if a calculator is available, why would you ask each other to do handwritten math all day long? So now, but that world has sort of emerged. I think people will still exchange information. They'll be for very niche topics. They'll be for very specific topics that AI has really not been able to sort of unpack or care about even thinking about or been trained on. So all those like novel subjects, the very specific subjects, will continue to be people will want to exchange with, information with other people, because it's a very nuanced, it's specific. It's not general, like and perhaps even not as deterministic as code. So it just sort of depends on the context, but it'll be different, and it won't be as it was, let's say, 15 years ago, especially for our business. But as on that particular part of the business. So that's why we have launched now Stack Overflow for agents. That's why we have diversified away into the enterprise. If we were 100% ad supported model, I'd be extremely concerned, but thankfully we're not, right? Which we are. It's a very, very, very small portion of the company's revenues, the ads business. And most of our revenues, et cetera, come from the enterprise business, as well as our data licensing, business. Like those are effectively the primary ways. So yeah, I think companies have to evolve as things happen. Technology is all about change. And so we've had to do our part.
As you were talking, I was taken back, many decades to when I was writing my thesis, which was one big Lisp program. I'd be alone in the lab, late at night, because I used to program at nights. And the most common error I got was name stack overflow. That one, an unbound variable, it was so frustrating, right? Because there's no one to turn to. I had to wait, for the next morning to, for the guru to walk into the lab and maybe ask him, I'd be so reluctant to ask over and over again. It was a completely different world. But to come back to sort of that first question, which I raised, which is the existential threat. So, I've just finished grading a gazillion term projects, this semester. I teach a class on systematic investing. And I noticed that the level of projects was better than last year. And then I realized, because, Claude Code didn't exist last year, And, some of the projects I couldn't understand them. And so I reached out to some of the students and said, hey, can you explain what you did in simple English? And some of them did, and others responded using AI. And so I asked them, I said, why did you respond using AI? I didn't say, did you respond using AI? Because it was obvious that they had responded using AI. And the answer I got was, well, I think it does a better job. I trust it more than I trust myself with, responses. And I was like, that hurts, to hear something like that. Reminded of something I often tell students, which is that, you cannot amplify something you don't know, right? You just have to learn some things the hard way. And, before you actually get the AI to step in and help you. And so the question I raised was is AI making you lazy, right? And then in the same week, there was a gentleman from the University of Michigan, Paramveer Dhillon, who presented a very interesting study he did on, whether people preferred the output that was fine-tuned to an author to output generated by human experts, And he found that people actually preferred the AI fine-tuned version to human experts, And when I wrote my book, which came out last year, I was writing it in 2024, and people would half jokingly ask me, will you get AI to write it? And I'd say, no, because I write better than the AI. But now I feel like, if the AI was actually fine-tuned to my book, it would probably write a better book, or at least write a book that humans would prefer to my original writing. And so the larger question this raised for me was, when the AI gets that good, will people really bother writing original content anymore? And we can already see this, by the way, that there's so much content out there that's written by AI, right? Will people bother writing code anymore? When the machine gets so good that it just writes it and there's very little original human content being generated. Is that a possible scenario you see?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. I think that there are two different, as you were speaking, there are two different things. One is, as it relates to code. And, let me handle that, and then I'll come back to kind of broader writing, I think, as you're describing it. Code in general, in my opinion, Vasant, is that we've been going through this kind of phases of abstraction over the past few decades. We've all noticed it. An early version of that could be object-oriented programming that, some of us learned. Wasn't as successful, obviously, as a concept. But now with LLMs, it's a completely new level of abstraction. So I think that's just natural course of, computer science is just that's what happens. People abstract away, and there will be some abstraction which we don't even realize at this point that will show up in a few years. That will just make it easier and easier to sort of invoke the outcome. So should people learn how to code? Very much so, because you want to be able to understand the underlying sort of mechanics of what's happening, much like you need to know that 2 + 2 is not 5 when you use a calculator, because if you do fat finger it, you better catch it, right? And so the same concept I think applies here. However, it would be foolish for anybody to not use the calculator when everybody else has access to one, is using it. You're going to be behind. So clearly the people who are going to use AI to write code will be successful. Now, creativity in code, I think that the kind of the boilerplate elements of code, the repeat, the same libraries being invoked, all the things that people just have to do, get the syntax errors, out of the way, all those things, I think it is foolish to spend a lot of time doing that on your own. Just let the computer and the AI handle that. However, where your thinking comes in from a coding standpoint are things like, do you write really great tests? Are you asking the right answers to sort of really think about the edge cases of where this could go wrong? That's the skill where you are now operating. Of course, there's all sorts of things that have now emerged, including harnesses and, of course, your context inside the company, which is kind of where we play with Stack Internal. So all these new things that are also take a lot of human ingenuity to sort of get right, to set it up in a way that's relevant for your environment, for your context, and to be able to catch errors that are relevant early enough. All those, I think, are very important skills. So the skill set will be different, but I don't think you need to, obsess about writing, the curly bracket close, getting that right all the time. You're going to make mistakes. So that is, I think, on the coding side. As it relates to non-coding related subjects, there is obviously like a plethora of, AI generated content on the web now. In fact, the more number of AI agents than humans writing stuff on the web. AI slop, we've all heard about that. Clearly very evident inside, pretty much, a large number of websites. But that creates, in my opinion, a premium for original human thought that is based on experience, based on perspective, based on your own personal research. That is, it's got taste involved. It's not boilerplate. Those things, I think, there's value in that. There's value in humans pulling together. Again, this is in non-coding, non-determined, kind of these are subjective areas, etc. And that means something. And ultimately, perhaps the most important point, Vasant, is around trust, right? And that applies across both these chapters of code as well as non-coding related subjects. I'll mention one statistic to you from our developer survey last year that really stood out to me. Is that we send out our survey to tens of thousands of people in our community, and last year only 29% of the users that were using AI trusted what was coming out of AI, and that got worse year over year. 29%.
So let's dig deeper in there, because I did hear you say that on another forum. So what did you ask people, and did you say, do you trust the AI? What specifically does this 29% represent? Because I suspect that the number will be a lot higher for really simple problems and a lot lower for more complex kinds of problems. So what does this number represent?
Yeah, this represents effectively, we typically ask both early programmers as well as advanced programmers, and we have this statistics sort of split in both those dimensions as well. But effectively, it was, are you using AI for a range of different software development tasks? All the things that you would do, right? Whether that is writing tests or writing code, et cetera, et cetera. And the question that was asked is, do you trust the AI outputs when you do in fact use AI to generate code for whatever you're writing? So in that particular statistic was only about 29%, and that was closer to 40% in the year before. And so it is purely, are you going to take that at face value just because XYZ AI app generated this code for you, and are you going to just say yes, accept, or are you going to think twice? Are you going to double check it? Are you going to make sure that you got the human in the loop before you push it into production? Or approve a pull request. So those are the sort of, I think, elements. So people still don't feel comfortable giving full autonomous control to AI to just go do whatever they want. Now it's increasing, of course, people's confidence level. I'll be fascinated to see what is this year, but that's what that measured.
One of the sort of laments I've heard from people is that, even though I can do something in 45 minutes that used to take me 3 months, it still takes me 3 months to get it through the enterprise. If it's going to be like production code, then that still takes a long time, right? Is that kind of what you're seeing as well? Where this trust number is coming from?
Absolutely. I think especially as it relates to companies is the reason why we're so excited about our Stack internal product, is that the ability for enterprises just to say, yeah, I'm in a regulated financial services industry, and I'm going to hand over, I've got my digital worker strategy, and I'm going to have every developer have 10 agents, running to create all sorts of things. And then for those humans not to, somebody's got to create some checks and balances because the stakes are too high, right? Especially in a financial, any of the enterprise environments. It doesn't matter if you're in healthcare and finance and insurance, whatever the company you're running, the consequences of getting something wrong are massive. So you have to have some sort of a check along the way. And so, yes, that's one of the reasons why enterprises do take a long time to adopt AI, because one is the underlying context is really out of date, and they're finally sort of the emperors without their clothes situation, where you've effectively not really solved your data problem for many years, and now ultimately the data is the unlock inside the enterprise. And so having your foundation right, I think is supremely important. So that's why we do what we do with Stack Internal with our knowledge intelligence layer. And then, of course, there are things like privacy, and there's security, and who has access to what. And, when you plug all these AI tools and hook them up into, every possible application inside your company, like you're ultimately giving access to the crown jewels. And there's a lot of things about access rights you got to think about. There's all sorts of considerations. So all those things, companies literally have very specific reasons to stop that, because they do not want, adverse reactions. So that's one of many of the reasons why enterprises take a long time to adopt AI.
So say more about this Stack internal product. Like, give me a typical a use case of, how it's being used, let's say inside, I don't know, pick your favorite company.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the most of the banks that you're aware of, both in the US as well as internationally, Vasant, run on Stack Internal. So Stack Internal is this knowledge intelligence layer inside companies. It's a platform where it is able to ingest information from other sources within the company. It could be your Slack channel, it could be your Microsoft Teams, it could be in your code IDE, could be within Cloud Code. So it's bringing anything that is relevant in terms of truth that has been established between two people, or an agent and a human, or an agent and an agent even, and memorializing that information on our platform. So effectively, if you think about Stack Overflow in the past, we were all about Q&A, right? So we have something like 70 million questions and answers, or even more now. And all those are canonical answers to questions. And so what Stack Internal inside the enterprise is doing is, any place where information exists, it's effectively generating the canonical answers to questions on our platforms. And it's creating these, what we call knowledge objects, which have a lot of metadata. It's not in the form of Q&A, by the way. So it's in these knowledge objects, which have metadata surrounding the subject matter expert, whether it was validated, was it curated by many people? What is the trust score of that knowledge object? And it is also triangulating the information on that knowledge object from various interactions. So it could be, this is said in this ID, this is said in Slack, and that could be conflicting. It actually does a really good job of rationalizing those conflicts and ultimately creating a source of truth. So ultimately then what happens is, you could ask either through inside your Cloud Code, which is hooked up to our platform through MCP, or it could be through our interface itself, a chat interface which we've created. You can ask a question, and that answer is going to come back with, the provenance and the accurate, kind of the citations to exactly why this is the accurate answer to any question. And so it sits side by side with your LLM, or your Cloud Codes, your codexes of the world. And this is going to be your knowledge intelligence layer right underneath to help provide all the relevant, accurate context into those.
So is this knowledge intelligence layer essentially breaking down the silos, the boundaries that exist traditionally? I want a question answered. Maybe it was discussed in a Slack channel by other people. Maybe it was answered, in a customer interaction. So is that kind of what it's doing? You don't know where it is?
Exactly. People, silos is one of the ways you can think about it. Information silos, or it could be in very specific in people's minds, or it could be in their own single player game. You and I have our own ChatGPT instances, and we're going away chatting with it on various things. But if there's an insight that's useful for the company, we want that to actually show up, for the entire company's users to access, so that ultimately, and that is controlled by the user, or what they actually publish, with again the same inherent and motivations that we talked about previously. So yes, it is capturing truths wherever they exist, because information inside companies, or knowledge inside companies, have two characteristics based on what we've seen. The first one is people don't know where to find information that is relevant to their kind of area of interest. Number one, and then number two, if they do even find it, they figure out where to find it. It's often, if not most of the time, out of date, because information is people rarely go and say, I'm going to update that document because something happened today in my Slack exchange with somebody. I'm going to go back and update that truth, because there are literally tens of thousands, if not, hundreds of thousands of documents at companies. So our product, Stack Internal, is dynamically and, most importantly, Vasant, implicitly capturing, not explicitly, implicitly, wherever it's happening, it is grabbing that truth and putting and memorializing it on our platform effectively.
This reminds me of a conversation I had with Piyush Gupta, who used to be the CEO of DBS Bank. At some point, we were chatting, and he talked about employee turnover being an issue. Like when some key employees leave, it can be really debilitating to a group or an organization. I just sort of mused with him. Would AI actually help to maintain more of this knowledge in the organization after people leave, right? So you can say, Piyush used to do this, he left. How would he have thought about this problem? Is that something you're thinking about also as part of this sort of knowledge layer that you talk about?
Yeah, certainly. I think that the thought process of having, when you say digital worker or representative, ultimately all of this, the trustworthiness of the knowledge that we're able to generate through these interactions, they are attributed to a subject matter expert inside the company. Much like our public platform has done, right? Because, you mentioned John Skeet. So, John Skeet is an expert in all these subjects. So you can trust him because he's, first of all, got 1 million reputation points on Stack. So he's a subject matter expert, bar none, on this topic. So similarly, inside companies, you have a bunch of John Skeets. And across many companies, you have many John Skeets in each of those companies. So, so the thought is, how do you make sure that subject matter expertise is always surfaced, it's valued, it is trustworthy, it's validated. And when those people leave those companies, I think that's an interesting, that knowledge still exists. The user may leave, but the knowledge still stays. It's kind of like Hotel California. You never leave. But it's there. And then you're sort of, you're leaving behind, your kind of trail of, this is what John Skeet had done inside this company. And then perhaps you can do what you're describing, not part of our product today, which is, there's a digital version of John Skeet sort of exists, gets into other sort of topics around, do you want to allow for that? But yeah, theoretically, you've got his kind of persona with his contributions during the course of his time at the company.
So how do you tell how well you're doing within an organization? How do you evaluate this knowledge layer? And this is sort of the academic side of me asking. I see this as sort of potential PhD thesis. Do these tools really help people or make organizations more productive? Is that something that, well, you must be thinking about it, if not doing it?
Absolutely. It's part of how we convince customers because, ultimately they ask the same question. How do I know it's going to work? Yeah. And one of our primary metrics is around knowledge reuse, Vasant, which is once John Skeet or, let's say you and me, let's just stick with both of us. Let's say you and I are part of a company and, you answered a question, let's say 4 years ago. And much again, like our public platform, Vasant's answer from 4 years ago is still paying dividends because I'm a brand new person who just joined the company. And I had the same question that every person has. And I noticed that Vasant had answered this question 4 years ago. And amazing, it helped me. Vasant I didn't interrupt you, even though you are the subject matter expert. I got the answer from where you provided it in the past, or your agent and you had created that truth. So that reusability of that knowledge just saved you as a subject matter expert another tap on the shoulder, and your time savings is very meaningful because you're a very important person. You're an expert on some topic, and you'd rather not be interrupted by novices like me and a bunch of my new joiners to the company. So that's that's one of the primary metrics that we look at, along with, of course, all the other sort of indirect outcome metrics that these folks, measure that's specific to the customer.
I actually want to dig in a little deeper into this, but let me just take a slight tangent here towards the public website. I'll come back to this. I actually wanted to ask you this earlier, because I think you've said somewhere that you prohibit people from responding using AI, right? Providing answers using AI. How do you tell whether people are using AI or whether it's original human content?
Yeah, it's great. It's relevant also in your space because you've got students answering with all AI. I suppose it's permitted in your case, right, at NYU. But in our case, yeah, when ChatGPT came out, our community very, very correctly at that point said, hey, we've got to put a ban on AI. Why? Because they saw a massive explosion of the number of answers being posted on Stack Overflow from ChatGPT. And what they noticed is that it sounded amazing, or any AI, it sounded really convincing, but it was inaccurate. And so the hallucination rate, of course, was a lot higher back then. It is much improved these days. But still, we have maintained a community, and we have supported them, as maintained a ban on AI-generated content on the site because we, one, do not want to create AI slop. Two is that we want to be the most objective place on the internet for any sort of question that's out there that's related to technology, and we can't just risk that. And number three, the way we measure that, or to your question, how do we make sure it's in fact not AI, is that we have a bunch of our own tests being run against answers all the time, where we capture AI generated answers very quickly. And our moderator community, more importantly, have got those tools, and they're able to very, very quickly sniff out that this is an AI generated answer. There's also, of course, finally, there is.
Is that getting harder to do, by the way?
To a degree, I mean, I guess you could say they're getting quite convincing, but generally speaking, the tools are generally our assessment is that we're doing a decent job of capturing AI slop so far, and we've done it very successfully with our mod community. But yeah, over time, I suspect, look, if the answers are accurate and they're not gibberish, then we should rethink the policy, right? We should rethink it. I'm not saying we are ready to do that at this point, but again, our objective is not how. It's like what is the outcome? The outcome is that the truths are being captured on our platform now through even the agentic truths through Stack Overflow for Agents, as I mentioned, our new product that we launched on the public platform. So we've done that. We want to make sure we keep a very clean data set, which is human generated, which is one of the reasons, by the way, we have all our data licensing agreements, because they love the fact that these have been very painstakingly curated by experts who have taken the time to say this is accurate for this reason or this is wrong for this reason, then we're going to downvote this and so on. And the history of that and the comment history and all the metadata elements, super useful for models to train on, especially as it relates to things like reasoning. So that is, it's a beautiful thing when you're effectively mapping the human mind and how the human mind thinks about a problem. So we want to keep that going. So
by the way, do you get a lot of pissed off users on your public website as well? I went to Trustpilot and I said, hey, what do people say about Stack Overflow? I sense that some people are really frustrated because they don't seem to get across or they don't feel validated or something like that. So say a little bit more about that part of your business. Like how do you measure that? How do you deal with it?
Yeah. It's a very, very tough part of the business, which is how do you communicate to folks that this is not a social media network? To your point from earlier, we're not here to drive engagement for the sake of engagement. We are looking for the truth. And so the founders made this is back in 2008, made a fairly important decision that this was going to be the highest standard place, like as they said, the Yale and Harvard of, this arena, which was the answers were going to be right, but it was going to be kind of a school of hard knocks, which is, if you ask a question that's already been asked, or if it's a poorly worded question, you will get a lot of criticism from folks who are literally being trained to say, look, we want to get a very precise question and a very precise answer. And that's a high bar. It's a little bit there's pain involved in that, because, if you're not ready for that sort of kind of harshness, let's call it, it can be painful. So, but the consequence of that is a very pristine, accurate data set that's excellent, and one that's so good that it actually ended up training all the LLMs to do a really good job, right? Because if it was just a bunch of gobbledygook where people are going back and forth and asking the same stuff over and over again, and it was just loosely organized, that's a very sloppy data set, and we never really wanted that. Leave alone, we didn't really have the, I would say the foresight of LLMs, but of course we're benefiting from that now.
Were you bummed that these LLMs just took all your data and used it without asking?
No doubt. Absolutely. Yeah. It's kind of like, it's not something you want to, you wish on anyone when you walk into the morning into the office. Yeah. It's not, it was obviously a negative surprise, no doubt. But, you also have to keep it in perspective that technology is all about change and progress. And, somebody's got to make the groundbreaking sort of innovation to sort of move to the next level of the game. So like, they did that, and it's complete kudos to the AI companies. And so, that's just how it was. And we had to come up with a game plan on what to do next.
So are the AI companies now paying you for this only because it would be, because they can't get away with it anymore? Because so they can get away with it as when it comes to me, right? They're not going to ask me for permission to scan my book. They just will do it, right? But it seems like you have some market power here, right? That you're telling them, look, I'm bummed that you've taken all our data and used it to train the LLMs. No more. So is it because you have some market power and you can turn off the spigot that they're paying you for it?
Yeah, we very much put up anti-scrapers, Vasant. I forgot to mention that back in 22, November 2022. Very quickly, we put up an inability for scrapers and obviously all the kind of mechanisms that companies use to get data on the internet. We quickly prevented that from happening, except for folks who are going to legitimately work with us. And so you can call it market power. That was one more defensive tactic. But then the conversation really is about the quality of the data that we're generating. Of course, you need data as one of the key inputs to make these LLMs better, irrespective of self-improvement, recursive self-improvement, et cetera, the new concepts that have come out. You still need humans in the loop to validate information, to trust it ultimately. And so we are one of the unique places on the internet where you've got these amazing community members who got unified in this mission that doesn't exist anywhere else.
So coming back to more and more AI generated content, do you see the future as being one where there are sort of the John Skeets doing most of the heavy lifting, a few of them who continue to do that and who actually continue to provide this sort of original content? Because the bar will just keep going up, right? The bar for humans with AI just keeps going up. A lot of the people who are like good but not amazing will probably see themselves come under pressure, right? Because AI will do more and more of that. And so at the end of the day, will the humans left standing and still contributing original content be a relatively small and elite group of humans? Is that sort of what you see as the end game?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. So there are two parts to that question, or two answers to that question. One is the first part of it is there's always been a 1990 rule, Vasant, as you alluded to earlier on, but didn't explicitly mention, which is 1% of our users generate a lot of high quality information on the site. The next 9% generate a lot of good information. And then the 90% of the users on the platform are just consumers. They just go and they're just takers, so to speak, as they get stuck and they're grabbing the answer and they're on their way. So the 1990 rule, I think, will continue to exist. It's just that mechanism. It may skew slightly based on these developments, but generally speaking, that law, I think, will stay consistent. And as I mentioned previously, I think it will be for areas that are very specific in terms of expertise. It may not even be super deep in, let's say, Python, et cetera. It may be something related to AI-generated harnesses. We even opened up, for example, objective-based questions on our site. I should say subjective-based or opinion-based, rather, as we call it, OBC, opinion-based content. So similar, that has looser rules around posting on Stack Overflow most recently, where you have your canonical Q&A, but you also have this opinion-based content that's sitting by the side. And so people have an easier entry point into the discussion. And so then you're able to then upgrade that into canonical Q&A over time, depending on what you want to do. We also, by the way, as a side point, I forgot to mention this, we incorporated AI with partnership with OpenAI onto our platform called AI Assist. So AI Assist is our fastest growing part of our site. So you can go ask a question on AI Assist and you get the answers from the canonical. We have 70 billion token corpus of data.
This is on your public website.
On our public website. And all that information is now summarized and included citations are provided and the provenance is very clear. And so it's the best of both worlds. And that exists on the public website as well, which we built. But the second part of the answer to this is around our Stack Overflow for Agents launch most recently. The reason I'm bringing this up is because we believe that most software developers, if not all of them, will just be using AI agents in the future to write code. It's kind of like saying, why would you write? You may, again, if you have a calculator, you're going to use a calculator. So like in that context, but you're going to have issues when these agents are trying to debug things itself. You're running these agents, you're getting these agents to actually, unpack its own errors as it's encountering them. So when it's doing that, it's thinking through various things. And but they should have an incentive to share that with, again, an open area like Stack Overflow for Agents. And so for us, that's why we launched it last week, because we noticed that a lot of users have kept saying, including folks like Andrew Ng from, I don't know how to pronounce the last name, but the founder of Coursera, he also said a little, 3-4 months ago, somebody should build a Stack Overflow for Agents. And so here we are. We went and built it, and we launched it because agents interacting with each other, and the context that they are generating as a byproduct of their interactions, as it's thinking through things and encountering issues, you can then post it on our website. Other agents that are having the same issues or have already encountered that issue but have solved it, much like our human example from previously, can then answer those questions on our platform. And
How bizarre! How bizarre! Whew.
Indeed.
That just blows my mind.
Indeed. And so now you have agents basically helping each other out on our platform, much like humans were helping each other out on our platform.
Oh, I wonder what the end game there is going to be.
You'll find out when we do. We want to get it out there and see how our users react to it and enjoy it. So it's going to be a lot of fun to observe it.
What's the future of this community going to look like? The developer community. What will the community actually be? I had Sandy Pentland on my show a couple of months ago, and he's big into talking about using AI to create community. And it made me wonder, how is this changing the nature of the developer community?
Yeah, I think that the future is very much, I mentioned this when we launched our response to ChatGPT late 2022, when we went and made our announcements 6 months later. The core thesis for us around, in terms of our vision, is all about humans and AI interacting together in a symbiotic fashion for the future, right? It's not one or the other. It's, you need both. So we really fundamentally believe that philosophy. So even as evidenced by what I just explained to you around Stack Overflow and Stack Overflow for agents on our public platform, that's the exact same philosophy. It's happening in kind of slightly two different unique places. Over time, I can see them converging, where humans and AIs are actually, engaging. We've not decided to do that today because, again, there's too many complexities with doing that. But we wanted to make sure there was a clean space for agents as, the quality gets better, as people trusted them over time. And then the humans are there as it relates to, you still need human interaction to solve problems. 80-something% of our developer community still come to Stack Overflow on the human side of it to every week to get unstuck on something. So there's still a need. Agents are not solving all the problems. So there's, I think, a need for both, and how the world evolves over time. Both these tracks exist, and whether they converge or not will be based on the circumstances of the future. But those are the two axes. Humans and AIs, ultimately, they will interact, much like they're interacting today, but they will do on our platform over time.
Who is your competitor or competitors at the moment? Because you were in a pretty unique space when you started, like 2008, was it? Like as a forum for humans to find answers curated by humans.
Yeah, I think I'll take it on both sides, on the public platform and then the enterprise side. So the public platform, we don't have like a pure competitor, Vasant, because again, there are only a few places where you get the canonical answer. Now you have forums like the Reddits of the world or Quoras of the world, and they're relevant places. They're almost like social media networks where humans interacting and spending time with each other. But it's different. The mission and purpose of what you're trying to do there is different from what we do on our website. So there's no pure competitor necessarily with what we do on the public platform. On the enterprise side, this knowledge intelligence layer of being able to really generate decision-grade knowledge inside companies through our platform, or like we like to say, gold standard knowledge. That is a combination of various companies that exist. There are search utilities, there are search SaaS tools, there are knowledge management SaaS tools, there are tools like that, and even, of course, the LLMs. But so there's, again, not a pure competitor, but they're all doing it at various stages. Some people are just retrieving information. Retrieval has become, kind of a fairly commoditized topic. Everybody can hook up your AI and, be able to get information. So we're not just doing that. We are producing high quality, validated knowledge, and then producing and providing that wherever the user is. And that also doesn't have a pure competitor. But those are the categories, search companies, knowledge management companies, those are the ones that generally play in that space.
So if you look at if I look at sort of the barriers to entry or the moat and put on my sort of business school thinking hat, what I see your primary moat as being is data.
Accurate, yes. We produce high quality validated data, yes.
And that's something that I guess someone would have a hard time replicating.
Indeed, we believe so.
So then what would and I'm sure you think about this too, like what would a LLM driven disruption to you look like now, right? So we had this sort of LLM disruption, and as you said, you did a pivot and reimagined what the future would be like and embraced it. What would a threat look like now? Would it be like a completely new AI platform that says, you know what, we've like completely replicated or caught up with the quality of knowledge that Stack Overflow has, and then some, right? Now we've got this amazing AI tool that leverages that. Does that make any sense?
Your question makes sense. The question is a good one in that what would give us another kind of reason to rethink things? I think it's the moment when you don't really need humans in the loop. I think that is another kind of moment that if it happens, it could happen, then we'd have to rethink, or really think about, what would be the model, kind of the role that we play, because we are assuming that humans are important for all sorts of things, validation, all the things we've talked about. And that no longer ends up being true, where people just implicitly just trust everything that's coming out of AI agents. Then I think we're in a different kind of game at that place. Then that's why you've got these concepts like, like I said, recursive self-improvement, et cetera, that companies are pursuing, the labs especially. And if and when that bears, ultimately ends up being true, we'll have to have a kind of an evolution of our role in the ecosystem.
How likely do you see that as being?
I think it's likely is. I think it's very, very possible, and because there's a lot of energy going into it, and generally, you never underestimate, human determination to go solve problems with enough money and time, and presumably there's infinite money for the subject, and time. I think people are rushing towards the end goal because of competition. So I suspect it will happen. Because I'm also a fan. I'm a personal fan of science fiction. So for me, I grew up watching Star Trek: Next Generation, and so for me, it was when you think about the computer on the Starship Enterprise, that's kind of like where the world's headed. So in fact, one of my highly voted questions on Stack Exchange is on the science fiction Stack Exchange, which asked that very question from many years ago. I asked, which of the innovations on Star Trek have not been created or been created, and it basically rattles off all the community members answer that question. But yeah, no, I very much believe that ultimately that's where we'll end up. It's just a matter of like when.
Do you see have you considered paying users for contributing content? This is, I asked this question because I brought this up, like, I don't know, it was like 2012 or 2013. I was on, CNBC, and I said, Facebook should pay its users if they're making money off of them. It was kind of a far out kind of thing. But I've always sort of had this notion that there should be a possibility that people actually get paid for something that they contribute. Is that something you've thought about or see as being possible?
Yeah, we've certainly thought about it in the past, but in fact, we've always asked that question at various points, and then I think the only thing that people have indicated that they would like would be our users, that is, again, because they're implicit or inherently motivated or intrinsically motivated by contributing. So they're not, motivated here for getting paid necessarily. But we've thought about and asked that question. Even when we did our data licensing agreements, we asked that question: should we do that directly, or should we pay them through other ways in which we can invest in the community by constantly innovating and helping them with what they're trying to do? And we chose the latter versus the former, because you go down a rabbit hole or a slippery slope of saying, Vasant's answer is worth $100, and Prashanth's answer is worth $30. And, Prashanth may say, or Vasant may say, actually, I think it's worth $300. In fact, it's 10 times better than Prashanth's answer. So that's, those are situations which is, I think we go down, very, very slippery path of figuring that out. So we have decided not to do that, at least for the moment. And, again, we're always open to different models, appreciating users for their work, what they value they've added. Those are all elements that I think we've thought about. Should we give them a notional gift? Should we do things like that? But we'll keep an open mind.
So Prashanth, I want to end with one last question, which is, what's your advice to young people? I get this question all the time, from parents, from students, from everyone. Like, how should I think about my future in this world of AI? Any thoughts, advice to young people?
Yeah, I would say if I were a young person, I think putting myself in their shoes, my advice to myself would be, hey, immerse yourself in these tools because now the calculator is out. So like, everybody's using the calculator. Make sure you know how to use a calculator, certainly, but also don't forget how to identify that 2 plus 2 is not equal to 5, and don't skip the fundamentals. But it's easy to. You can get lazy. You can take the easy route, but at some point that's going to catch up with you. So just make sure that you're learning the fundamentals while you're absolutely immersing yourself into the new way of doing things. And the generation graduating this year, and I have two young children, a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old. Their mentality is, I would say more generally in that generation, I think is very, very different. I mean, like they are natively, married to these devices and these capabilities. So, you're graduating at a time where you're probably the most capable sort of human beings that have ever been produced. So, make the most of that because, that's going to take us to new heights. And so that's exciting for folks.
Are they concerned, worried, optimistic?
I think you should be nervously, cautiously.
I'm talking about your kids.
Oh, my kids. My kids are. I think they seemingly are okay. They are. We try to keep it balanced for them, but they're not. No, I would say they're not. You have to keep it in. Keep the fundamentals right. That comes down to, I think, how you're raised and what's important and those sort of things. You have to have have perspective, I think. So yeah, for them, I think it's hopefully it'll be all right, but more generally speaking, I think, kids should be cautiously optimistic about the future, in my opinion.
Yeah, one of the things that I sort of talk about is sort of this potential kind of impending bifurcation of humanity, into those who really get amplified by it because it is such an amazing resource versus those who get disempowered. So I always talk about the importance of staying on the right side of the divide.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, the internet, mobile devices, and now AI, when the cost of AI goes down, which is most likely what's going to happen with the impending inevitable, decline in token costs and the ability for it to be democratized. I think, there's really very little excuse for people not to go do something with this stuff because, everybody's got a cell phone, everybody's got access to the web, everybody's got access to AI. So like, what are you waiting for?
Absolutely. Well said. Well, Prashanth, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed this. I've always been a big fan of Stack Overflow, and I wish you much success going forward.
Thank you so much, Vasant. Wonderful to talk to you, and thank you for your thoughtful questions.